Welcome to Walk With Me, where we journey with others through the challenges they've faced in their life and the lessons they've learned from them. Real people sharing their stories and the wisdom they've gained from a life well lived. And here's your host, Stephanie Bloom.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Scott. Can you please introduce yourself and the short title to your story?
Sure. My name's Scotty Amos, and I have a book called Where Do We Go From Here? It's about our journey, our family journey through adoption, and really the handling the issues with trauma, childhood trauma specifically, and how to navigate and what we've learned, and really what we want to share with as many people as possible, the difficulties, but and the hope around child trauma and how it can be resolved and helped.
Okay, so tell me all about Scotty's life when he was a young man. What was that like?
Sure. It actually was probably a very traditional old style, lifestyle in 70s and 80s, growing up in two parents and regular school for the whole bit, and not a lot of tragedies, not a lot of difficulties, no social media, three or four channels on TV, and so not a lot of the things that our kids today are experiencing, and not a lot of memes and not a lot of funny jokes and on that and no TikTok. That's so it was in many ways a much simpler, easier life growing up, playing sports, going to church, and really from there going to college, and I lived overseas for a little while and came back and just started a kind of a business trying to figure out what's next in life, what are we going to do, and how are we going to make a mark in our life. And it was very I would also say very self-focused, self-interest. What am I going to do? Where am I going to go in life? And things happen that kind of changes that along the way. And
Yeah.
that's what our story's a lot about, because it's not about just me, myself, and I, but a lot about how you can help others, and sometimes the difficulties we encounter are a wake-up call and a mission, a purpose, right? That can give you an opportunity to share stories and help others that are going through it, through those same situations, and that's a lot of what that I've experienced.
So, Scotty, when you were growing up, did you always like enjoy helping others? Was that something that was innate in your culture or in your family?
Sure. I mean, we were a part, back then we were church goers, and you signed up and you just did it. And I don't think it was an awareness issue, but it was out of just kindness, I guess. I could be, you're taught how to treat people and treat people nicely and help the people less fortunate. And it wasn't ever a question. There wasn't ever anything overly serious or devastating for a child. When I was growing up, I didn't have family members that died suddenly or significantly that might have changed my experiences in life. So in many ways, it was just very traditional, very Gilligan's Island, so to speak, right?
Okay.
So
Okay. So you mentioned you lived overseas for a while and then you came back to the States and decided to start a business. What business did you start out with?
well, believe it or not, it's kind of funny where you start. But when I worked overseas, we worked for we were civilians working for the U.S. military over there, and so we understood. We got to learn a little bit about the government, military. And when we came back, we were looking for a business to start, and just by coincidence, it's amazing how you meet people and connect with people. And we end up meeting people who were looking for someone to help them in the flower business, and we ended up doing flowers for the military. Can you believe that? So we end up delivering flowers up and down the East Coast for the commissaries and the PXs and things like that. So that drove a lot of the business that we were in, and it was a fun experience, fun time, and it was limiting, but it was fun to be able to have my own business and do my own thing and that whole bit. So
Yeah.
it was nice.
It's satisfying to be able to carve out a life for yourself, right? Being in control of your
Yeah,
time and doing what you want with your attention.
exactly. And my father was from the generation where, you got out of school and you worked 40 years and then you retired, right? So,
Right.
and I was thinking, nah, there's got to be more to life than that, and the whole bit. So, I was looking to try to make my mark and see what good things could be happening and all that kind of stuff. So, went through all that, had a nice time, and end up um, selling that business and getting into some electronics and selling and working that within the government marketplace because I learned it so well and got some contracts, and actually I still do that today, so on the side. So
Hmm.
it was a very nice lifestyle, and that part of life was basically pretty straightforward and simple and the whole bit. And which, but I will say this, that because that was stable, that allowed us to go ahead and maybe take a little bit of a risk, which was when we adopted our kids from a baby, they call it baby home, orphanage in Russia. And
Okay.
that was both good and bad. The exciting part was, you know, God had given us some, or fortune, whatever you want to call it, had given us some real benefits in life. And maybe it was time to share and maybe help others and things like that. But what we didn't get was all the difficulties and challenges and things that come with it that we aren't trained for. So when we
Mhm.
brought home when we got united and came home with our kids, we thought, oh, because we're going to love them, everything's going to be wonderful, everybody's going to love us, and it's going to be happily ever after. And we found out that's not always the case.
Okay.
And in
So
fact, it often isn't the case.
what year was this?
That would have been 2010. So
Okay,
about 15 years ago.
2010. You decided
Yes.
to adopt from Russia. So what was that
Yes.
process like, and why did you pick Russia?
Um, Basically pick Russia because a lot of the people that we had connected with and known had, I guess there was a big influx of both China. You remember, I'm not sure if you remember back then, but they had just recently really closed it down. And one of the few countries that were uh, very open and had an opportunity in the whole bit, especially when we were looking for a sibling group. Russia was just the one that could do it a little bit quicker and faster, and not have you wait a couple of years for that process. So
Okay.
that was the main motivation. And I still remember this day coming arriving home and the kids sitting down looking at the first time they saw a washing machine and just sitting in front of the washing machine and watching the wash go round, 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 and thinking, oh, this is so cute. Isn't this going to be wonderful? Um, what we weren't taught is what trauma is all about, and childhood trauma specifically, and how trauma affects the brain.
Mhm.
And like what we like to tell people is, share with people is that it's actually a brain injury. It's not a
Yes.
condition. It's not an event. It's an actual changing of the brain and of how the synapses are changed. So every reaction, every interpretation of what they observe goes straight to the amygdala, which is people call it the low brain or the reptilian brain, or people are more familiar with the concept of fight or flight. And so everything is in high reaction, high fight, because they don't trust, because that sense of of trust and belief and love has been broken. They don't know who to trust anymore. But when you bring home kids like this, even this, and we've learned later in our story in our research, even babies who on day one who've been adopted, this can happen to, because there's something internally, it's an emotional breakage in that process. And that and that the agencies we work with that don't train parents for what comes next, what could be the possibilities, how difficult could it be. So we just thought just showing love would overcome all. And that was that was probably typical of most parents, and I probably even today from when I talk to parents. And it's important I should note that my experience was through adoption and childhood trauma through adoption, but childhood trauma can come in many different ways. It's not just through adoption. It can be any kind of abuse, any kind of neglect, and it can be even something as simple we see over here in the East Coast. Kids that don't even get a meal a good meal every day. That in itself can create trauma. And what they don't train you is, well, what do you do about it? And our natural reaction is, well, we were taught that if you did something wrong, you got in trouble, and you establish more authoritarianism, and you show more discipline and more punishment, and that will correct everything. And what we found out with trauma, it's the exact opposite. Because until you establish or reestablish that connection and that belief and that love, that's never going to happen. You're always going to reject anything on that end. So that got worse and worse and worse. And I mean, we were on the first name basis with the child services in the area. I mean, they would get a call and said, "Oh, hello, Scott," or "Scotty, you're nice to see you again." But it had gotten that bad, the problems, and we just didn't know what to do. And it
So
all culminated. Oh, I'm sorry.
what was the what are you referring to, like the children were getting into trouble and you were coming at it from authoritarian because that's just what you knew, and then that wasn't going well, and so it got to the point where CPS had to get involved. Is that what I'm understanding?
Correct. And
Okay.
over and over again, because with kids that also have trauma, and because of the way the brain is redone, and there's also becomes learning difficulties, it becomes ADHD, a lot of medicines get involved, and all of a sudden learning gets slowed. So they're way behind all their other peers at that age, and because they're way behind all the peers, they can't develop good relationships with other peers, and so they feel rejected and they feel angry and they feel depressed, and they don't know who to lash out at. So who do they lash out at? Their parents and any other caregiver they can find. And it's just a cycle. It gets worse and worse and worse. And you're taught early on that the only way to break a cycle is to be, as you said, more authoritarian. And it's only later that we found out everything we did was wrong. and and unfortunately, the moment we met, figured it out, was that, or the precipice for finding it out, was when we were in court, with childhood court, with the judge saying, "You really were ready to take our kids away," and really challenging us. And is this really how you want to live the rest of your life? Wow, that was like a shot to the heart. Like, they could actually take our kids away. That's how bad it has gotten.
Wow.
And that's the moment that I decided, okay, something had to change. I don't know what it was, whether it's, a higher authority, whether it's a principle, whether it's science, something help me. And it just so happened to be that very next day when I was out searching for anything, I ran into a friends of ours, friends of ours' wife who happened to be a therapist, and she said, "Well, of course, everything here they're doing is just standard childhood trauma." I said, "Huh? What's that?" And she pointed me in the direction of a little bit of researchers and of science, of neuroscientists, and then I just tore into it, and I realized, oh, everything is going to change. Everything we do has to be built on solving trauma. And what we learned, and the therapist that we follow is a gentleman named Bruce Perry. Recently, he wrote a book with Oprah 2 or 3 years ago, actually, dealing with adult trauma, but he's a specialist in childhood trauma as well. And his famous quote is that all healing comes through relationships with trauma. All healing of trauma comes through relationships, which means what we're doing typically is we're applying power and this through authoritarianism. Power and it's being rejected by the child naturally because they've already been abandoned, neglected, abused, and they don't trust it.
Right.
And how do you change that circumstance? How do you change that relationship? And and he shows in his many neuroscience documents, you can only change it with one way: getting down with them, connecting with them equally, and building that relationship. And how does that manifest itself? How does it differ? How do you heal the children over a long period of time? And that's what we learned, and that's what we've developed, and that's what I'm here to share, if possible, as much as possible with your members, and get the word out, and let them know there's hope, and there is a pathway forward.
Okay, so when you had this realization, when you got into this research and really just tore into it, like you said, what's the first thing you decided to do?
So the first thing that we learned is one of the monikers is consequences don't work. We're taught from top to bottom, apply consequences. Good, carrot and stick, good and bad. But with kids with trauma, they don't work because, once again, the relationship is broken.
There's
They
no
don't
trust
trust
there.
anybody,
Hmm.
right? And
So you,
consequences,
yeah, you could
yes,
offer all the rewards in the world, but they don't believe you. Just like when you
yes,
say there's going to be consequences, they don't believe you.
yes,
Mhm.
exactly. And that was the first aha moment for us. The scientific or the neuroscientific way was, well, how do you take a brain which has been, and the beauty of childhood trauma in the child brain is that, yes, it got reconfigured to the amygdala, but that means it also can get reconfigured back to the prefrontal cortex, where the thought process comes. So whatever was the negative, it can be the positive. There's a lot of science out there saying easily up to age 25, and many people are saying well beyond that now, that the brain can get adjusted, can work with, can be redeveloped to get a healthy process of that elimination. So I knew that was the end goal. How do you reconfigure our children's brains from the prefrontal from the amygdala prefrontal cortex? And so what are all the things we need to do to get that? And a couple of the keys was, from our perspective, you have to here's next step. So consequences don't work. Here's the next thing. You can't fix your kids.
Mm.
What? What do you mean you can't fix your kids? That's what we want to do. That's what we are as parents. We're going to help. We're going to change this child, but you can't fix them. What you can do is you can set an environment where they can heal.
Yeah.
But how do you do that? And that was the big aha moment for us. How do you create an environment where they can heal? Well, that might mean they can't do a lot of the things that all the other kids can do, because they're going to be in an environment which what I've learned is they're constantly being re-traumatized. You
Mm.
send them off on a bus. That's wild, wild west. That they're getting re-traumatized. They get off the bus and they're sitting in the hallway getting ready for their homeroom, or in the auditorium. They're in a classroom with 25 or 30 other kids. Many of those kids are also ADHD or hyper or full of energy just because they're kids. They don't know how to handle it. That's all these sudden reactions. They don't feel safe. They don't feel scared. Their teacher doesn't know trauma, so they see kids who aren't behaving well. They're going to give them a consequence. They're going to send them down to the teacher. They're going to send them in the corner.
Instantly,
The
no trust.
Yes, the other kids, and you know this, kids can sense when something's not right with somebody else, and they're going to torture that kid. They're going to ignore that child. They're going to know something's wrong and stay away from the child. All that is, again, the negative impression. What's wrong with me? And so all that. Then you have lunch, and then you have the recess period. Very little oversight. And even if there is oversight, it's usually not from a person who has any idea what trauma is.
Right.
They're just trying to keep all the kids from getting into big fights and getting injured. Then they're back in the classroom, same things. And then the bus ride home. No wonder our kids are coming home exhausted, frustrated, angry, and upset. And they get home and they want to yell and cry at their mother or their father, whoever's home. And the mother and father saying, "What did I do? What's wrong with you? I'm loving you. How are you yelling at me? Why'd you throw that at me?" And so they get angry and they get on a timeout. And it just goes round and round and round. So how do you break that? How do you change that? And that's what my book's about, and that's what I'm here to share as much as possible, and let people know that it's easy to say, it's not hard to do, but it is very doable. And it all starts with understanding the idea of what where a child gets re-traumatized and how you begin to change that. And one of the lines that I use oftentimes is, it's not how many great things you do for your child, it's how many negative things you can eliminate. That way they can be in an environment just like a cast, right? Environment where they can heal, And trauma, though, it's not going to be 6 weeks with a broken arm. Might be 10 or 15 years.
Mhm.
But you got to be willing to do that. You got to be willing to create that environment for them, but
Yeah.
they'll heal.
When we experience big traumas, sometimes some parts of our physiological self start working differently or shut down, or and so the healing process is as much rewiring or getting those things to come back on as it is mentally giving these children space to process and feel safe and okay. And then further to connect the mind with the body. Like you can't, a lot of the times with childhood trauma, there's a severed connection there where
Yes.
they learn that they need to ignore their needs because when they cry, they don't get them met or whatever the
That's right.
situation is, right? So
Yeah,
there's a lot
absolutely.
that goes back into healing someone who's experienced that childhood trauma.
That's so true. And so often, many of the articles and many of the conversations are just about the brain, the intellectual, but you're right, the emotional. And oftentimes, years later, it's the body that will in fact, there's a famous book, The Body Keeps the Score. And that's it's the emotion that they feel it, and that drives the behavior and the motion and how the brain is stimulated. So that is so true. And that's where over time, if you can create this, I'll call it this environment of safety, the cast, whatever you want to call it, they work on their coping skills, and they work on slowly but surely building resilience, right? So when something happens again, deal with it, and over time they learn how to handle it better, and all of a sudden doesn't become an emotional or psychological problem or issue. They figured out a way to deal with it. One of the things we talk about, and I'll briefly talk about the school that I got the kids in, because one of the things I realized early on from this research and from our experience is that our kids, when they have child trauma, they couldn't handle public school. So we really only had two choices: homeschool, or I didn't even realize it. I mean, this school in our area has been around for over 50 years, and it specifically works for kids with trauma. And they work with all the townships in the Philadelphia area. They service almost between in their schools, and they also have in-school counselors, over 7,000 kids every year. And it's a specific program around working through relationship on their issues. And one of the things they teach very early on is, and some of your listeners may have already heard of this, but I'll share it anyway, the 3 R's, which is the regulation, relationship, and reason. So kids who have trauma get dysregulated very quickly.
Yes.
And what happens is our natural reaction is punish them, get angry at them, yell at them, isolate them, time out them, the whole bit. What a school with trauma school does is their first goal is to get them regulated. And that might mean, in this particular school, they call it the resolve room, meaning they're not being punished. They're just going to go down to work out why they're angry, and going to be working out their anger with somebody. And as they work out that anger, figure out what gets them stuff, and they calm down. You never work out what the problem is until you've calmed them down with regulation, and two, built the relationship. Hey, buddy, what's happening today? What did you do this weekend? How you feeling today? And through that, then you can address through what they call reason, oh, so what did you do? How could you have done that differently? What do you think we can work on next time? What skills or what things can you do so if something like that's coming up, what can you do differently ahead of time so it doesn't affect you, so it doesn't get you upset? And those are the type of things over time that make a difference.
I am so floored that you take them from the situation into a room wherein the whole point is to just help them figure out why they're angry. Because so often we skip that step entirely. We don't care why you're angry. You're acting out. You need to be punished. Right. And
Yes,
that only compounds the problem. So brilliant that we just remove them and then partner them with someone who they already know cares about them. Right. That relationship
exactly.
part you mentioned
Yep.
is vital.
Everything is based on relationship. When the kids come into the school, every single one gets a tap on the shoulder, and every single one gets addressed by their first name. Now they will have smaller classrooms, or maybe 8 kids in a room, and again, many of them are behind academically, so that each one has their own program. All our kids are going to have IEPs and different types and different sorts, but they all work within that, and they all have counseling during the week, and so they can all share what's going on at home, and they can realize they can separate their experiences that they can't control with the experiences they can control. Because they can't control if their family is not in the house, or they're abandoned, or the parents are on drugs, or all those kind of things. But they can control when they're at school how to handle it, that they themselves can deal on that day and that moment. And in this particular school, I'm sure there's other schools like that, but this is a very, I'm so proud to be on the board to do them, because as I mentioned, my kids went through it, and they did so well that they were able to transfer back into the public school.
Oh, wow.
And that's the key. If they can build it, they can create that resilience. All of a sudden, you can build in an opportunity for them to get back into the public sphere again.
So it's almost like the school is a place to process trauma and move on, instead of, oh, you have trauma, it's a life sentence, you're here forever. Though I'm sure there are cases where students definitely benefit from that handholding, but the
Yes.
idea that they can go back into, the widely accepted normal is beautiful.
Yes. And some kids they go back and decide they don't feel safe enough, and they want to go back to the other school, which is okay. But the process is, it never stops, and they learn how to process the internal frustration or anger or the feeling, and through coping skills that they've learned over time, and that's really one of the keys. So that's the beauty. The process works. We call it positive, safe relationships. And so what we found, one of the big challenges that we found over time, is that it's almost like concentric circles, right? The first thing that they have to feel calm and secure in is in the household. And one of the biggest challenges is if there's two caregivers in the house, husband and wife or whatever, they have to be on board with the same philosophy.
Mm.
Because one of the things we learned for sure, is we had all kinds of therapists. We were having people in and out of the house all day long. OT, PT, you name it. We had every initial in the, but oftentimes they were all telling us to do different things.
Mm.
And I call it like swimming in quicksand. I mean, there's a lot of behavior modification. Behavior modification isn't going to work until you establish a relationship. A lot of the schools are all built to support and focus kids on the spectrum. That's a lot of behavior modification, which means a lot of the trainers and social workers that you have to come in and work with the kids are all educated and believe in that system. Well, that doesn't work. So one of the things we share with our parents is that you're in charge of your child, not the therapist. They don't tell you what to do. They're your tool. They're like a lawyer and accountant. They're very important. They have brilliant ideas if it fits with your philosophy. And if your kids have trauma, you have to first make sure that the only professionals that see your kids are ones who have been trained and understand trauma. Do that, again, advancement, everything has to be around the healing. So the caregivers have to be on the same wavelength. Then the extended family have to understand. We had many times where we just couldn't go to the Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah.
Because big event, TV, food all over the place, loud noises, relatives arguing over silly things. That was just too much stimulus.
Yeah.
Well, they're just going to have to understand. That's number two. Number one is safety. Are my kids safe? Positive, safe relationships. They all understand what we're doing, and they understand why. Our kids couldn't really play soccer like with all the other kids, because it's crazy land out there. There's 25, 30 kids all chasing the same ball, and one coach yelling at them, and parents telling they all it's not a good, safe environment for the kids. So we chose other activities. We chose a church that had members that understood adoption and trauma. So therefore, we had to change. We had to move. I mean, they were both were great churches, but one was built around more mission and all that kind of stuff, and this one had a lot of understanding about kids' issues. all of a sudden that makes it safer for the kids to go to Sunday school because the people were trained in it. They understand it. They can relate to it. They're not going to yell at the kids. Same thing with any kind of extracurricular activities. My son was really into Boy Scouts, originally into a wild, big Boy Scout troop where everybody was going to try to get Eagle. Too much stimulation, too much yelling, too much. Had to pull him out, got him into a safe, smaller group. He could still go camping this way, but it was understood. I had a chance to talk to the troop master. Those are all things that you have to be very intentional with, very focused with in teaching those people to understand what trauma is, because we're all apostles, really. We're all, once you understand it, you got to share it with everybody who's going to be in contact with your child. And
Yeah.
then through that, they develop the safety and they develop the relationships and the trust. And the more relationships they have, the more trust they have, the more they can heal. So I feel like I've been talking too much. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. I mean, like to your point that you can't really implement behavior modification if the literal wiring of the brain has been altered. Like it's not like we are all humans, yes, but we all operate differently. We've all had different experiences and it literally shapes your physiology. So to apply behavior modification to someone who's been through trauma is more traumatizing because then again they're starting to internalize, oh, I'm different, I'm weird, I'm not like everybody else, whatever. And that comes with its own issues later on down the road. So, at what age were your children, if this is something you want to talk about, when you kind of discovered these things and started being more aware of them and able to advocate for them better? Like, was it a rapid shift in your relationship?
I certainly wish it was that. I wish it was that fast. We They came home with us when they were 3.5 and 2.5.
Okay.
And there were physical issues and emotional issues, and there were common issues. It really took us, and again, because I was unaware and probably not well understanding of the process, took us 6 years before it really manifested itself in terms of this crisis. And one of the reasons I'm out there is don't let it take 6 years. I
Right.
want to share it with other parents that you can start on this in day one. You don't have to do what we did and learn it the hard way. We want to share it early on. You mentioned before about the authoritarianism. One of the things that we talk about is there's a difference between authoritarianism and authority, right? Authority is given because the child wants to be corrected, wants to be developed, wants to be loved, and wants to be told what to do. They want that,
They
but
need
they can
those
only,
boundaries. That's healthy.
yes, but they only want to do it from the people they trust.
Yeah.
We oftentimes say that kids want to know three things: do you love me? Do I trust you? Can you help me? Can you answer those questions? Then they're beginning, and if they answer those questions to the yes, that you're the person, they'll begin to accept your authority. They'll begin to accept, okay, I'll do what you're doing for me because I love you, not because you have more power than me. And
Right.
that's where the issue. We're trying to implement change by power. It's always going to fail eventually.
Well, especially for kids who have trauma, like you have to meet them on their level. They don't trust anything in the whole wide world. Why should I trust you? You have to prove to them, right? So them being able to answer those questions, you have already had to have exhibited those behaviors and characteristics to them.
And someone, like, because of your knowledge and background experience, that, but 90% of people don't know that. We just naturally react by showing more force, more authoritarianism, more power.
That's what we've
And
learned, right?
yes, yes. And that's how we're trying to change that the relationship, the structure, how we relate to other people. And to be honest, that can be applied to almost anything in this world. If we work on relationship rather than power, we're going to be a much healthier society and much healthier world. So I would claim. So one of the other things I often share with parents, and this is really hard because you know the caregivers at home, they're trying so hard, and they deserve the grace.
It comes
They
from
do
love, right?
yes, they do the wash, they do this, and the kid turns around and throws the food on the ground, or throws something on the floor, or yells and has all kinds of curse words, and And how do you deal with that? How get your buttons pushed, yelling back at them? And one of the phrases that we use with them is that the value of your love is not dependent on your child's response. You're doing this for a greater purpose, right? The value of your love is not dependent on your child's response. We're looking for our value and our recognition of who we are on how our child responds to us. We're on the wrong wavelength,
Mm-hmm.
and we're doing a greater purpose to taking care of these kids. And whether you're a faith or not faith, either way, the idea of creating healthier kids who can move on in life is a very noble thing to do. And that's we like to share that. And I know that's really hard. Oh, it's hard. You tell it, how many times you have your child want to tell them to go take a bath or a shower and they yell and refuse and say no. I mean, that can happen in any child. Kids with trauma just take that to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
And they refuse to give in. One of the things that we did is, it's and I'm sure parents understand this on their own level, is you give them the power to make their own choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the choices you give them are both okay to you too.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, my son who refused to take a shower or a bath, we said, okay, how often should you do it if you're not going to do it every night? And he went back and forth and decided every other night. And I said, okay, fine. And because he made a decision, he was willing to live with it. And he would try to get away with it, not doing it sometimes. And, we'd remind him and then he would get back on it. And, that's what kids do. But he felt better because he got to make a choice.
Yeah, he felt more in control because when you're traumatized, you have zero control over your environment, right? And so that violation and to be neglected or abused at that point, like extra insulting to the psyche, right? So anything coming up in the future, they're going to rebel against because they learned early on that it could hurt, and they're trying to avoid getting hurt, even though the choices they're making are not going to hurt them, right? It's just that response. It's innate at that point. So they have to learn how to take control of those situations and recognize that you may be upset for something small and innocuous, and just take a step back, like you said,
Right.
process things emotionally with someone they respect and admire.
And so what we do, we try to mimic what I talked to you about before about a resolve room.
Hmm.
Never send a kid off with trauma on a timeout, because now you're isolating them and now he's
Yep.
feeling bad about himself.
Shutting down again.
Yep. So everything has to be, whether you want to call it a time in or spending time with them, get on the couch and just calm down, do the 3 hours again, talk about some relationship thing and say, yeah, what could we have done differently if we did
Right.
that? Let them talk about it calmly and say, I guess I should have done this or something like that. And I said, okay, let's go try it again, or let's go have some ice cream or whatever. Because in the long run, you're looking at the longer picture, not that moment. You don't have to win the moment. You just have to win the relationship. Because as they grow and as they develop, they'll do okay. And as they calm and as the brain begins to change, all of a sudden they'll be able to do more schoolwork and more achievement that way. And they'll be able to have more relationships. And you'll see this over time, how it progresses. You can't push them, but it will all happen at the moment when it happens. So
Yeah,
to
you
speak.
you can't push
So
them, but you can lead them, right? Like you said, you can create the right environment for them to heal. So what other things in their environment have you found to be beneficial for these kids who have been exposed to trauma?
so um, as little uh, let me put this. So as little stimulus as possible, because you know um, they're so used to chasing dopamine. I
Mhm.
mean, aren't we all?
Yeah, right.
But they really are focused on dopamine. A friend of mine says it's discipline over dopamine, right? You got to focus on an environment where there's little, and that might mean no electronics, no, not a whole bunch of stuff in the bedroom, more books, more around us, hanging out. Uh, as we all know that how exciting the fidget spinners are, and the squishy balls, and sometimes the Lego, for these are certain ages. my kids don't do Lego anymore, and thankfully, because I'm sick and tired of stepping on them.
Best home defense system ever.
Yes, yes. Um, and and a couple of my kids, they enjoyed the simple rotation of doing weaving and sewing. They could make something. It didn't matter if they ever finished it. It was just calming and it was soothing. And they would take it. I'd give them a kit, so no matter where they went, they were on a trip or they went on some event and they were feeling nervous for it, they could just pull it out on their own and start working on it. Same thing with the squishies or the spinners or the rain balloons. They're wonderful. I mean, all kids love them, but those are all soothing because they're simple, they're repetition. They can just do it over and over and over again. That helps them calm their systems down, and that attracts their need. And as they calm down, they can get back into doing some other events again. Being around other people who relate to them. Oftentimes, our kids relate better to adults than they do their peers. And it makes sense because adults aren't going to yell at them, look at them funny. They're going to be nice to them. They're going to be kind to them. And especially if they're trained or consulted ahead of time what the process is. So you have to select who they're being around, what events they're going to be in, and how they can in that area. And then you're constantly observing, reviewing. Is this the right environment for the child? Are they able to handle this? Yes, should we change? Would not change. And other than that, it's just a matter of enjoying them and building a relationship. Even when we're frustrated and angry, it's all about relationship. So that's a lot of what we did, and it's made a huge difference. So,
what is something in yourself that has changed through this process?
well, thank you. That that is one of the things that I oftentimes talk about parents. We talk about us creating this environment for the kids, but really it's about changing us, the parents, because we were raised in a certain way of expressing ourselves in power, expressing ourselves in our what's good for me, right? And now we've learned this idea all about how do you suppress your desires, your needs, your ego for the benefit of somebody else. And what that's helped me personally in terms of relating to other people, relating to what it means in terms of how do you really build connections. And it's not just trauma that you need to build relationships on. Relationships are always first. And if you're involved in volunteer organizations, your work, you own a business, you're involved in any organization or church organization or volunteer organization, are you pushing to have your agenda put in, or are you working to develop a process where everybody works together, where it relates together? Is the relationship more important than the end product? And that's what I've learned, and that I guess there's a famous personal growth guy named Zig Ziglar. He's passed away now, but one of his famous lines is, all you need to do to get whatever you want in life is to help other people get what they need first. And that's just it's counterintuitive, right? But it's so true and so real.
Well, I think we were all raised with this idea of the individual. Like you said, what's good for me? What am I doing? What's my, stick in life, whatever. But I think we're learning that it's more about stewardship, like being a good steward of your community and, the things that you share. Because if you're a good steward of the things that you have access to and control over, it's better for everybody all around instead of just hoarding and thinking all of it's for you and you're so special. And it's just a different way of looking at it.
That's another line I love is I'm not sure who said it, but change is inevitable, but growth is optional, right? So something's going to happen to all of us, but then what happens? Are we living in our comfort zone, or have we gotten to the point where, okay, well, in order to grow, I have to get out of this comfort zone. I have to deal with these difficulties in life. How do I do that? How do I help other people who are difficulties in life? I might not want it. I might want the big fancy car and the big TV and all that kind of stuff. But is that helping me grow, helping me be a better person, helping other people that need it? And as we know, as what we learned from COVID, especially, is there's so many hurting people out there. And I know from the childhood trauma perspective, our kids are still suffering from post COVID time periods. It was a
100%.
horrible time for them. It was a
100%.
horrible time.
Isolating kids who don't need to be isolated is not a good idea, right?
It
Yeah.
seems simple when you say it like that.
Mm.
Like,
Well,
hello.
not every decision is made with everybody in mind, right? Um, what I also wanted to ask, like, what are you doing now? You said you work at this school and you're on the board. Um, what's exciting in your school right now? What's lighting you up?
So it it's just amazing to see some of these kids who come to the school. If you can envision the kid whose hair is over their face because they don't want to talk to you, won't communicate, will sit in a corner, and when they're ready to graduate, all of a sudden, it doesn't have to be a haircut, but the haircut, their energy, and they're even talking about college, and a lot of us might think, well, that's second nature, but for these kids, it might be their first time in their whole family generation that anybody ever went to college, and they're excited, and they have a fire in them, and it's just amazing to see the transformation. And when you can see this year after year about the change in them and growth, it's just an exciting thing. That's how I know that um, there's no such thing as a bad kid. There's no such thing as a lost kid. It just takes time, and we're willing to, as a society, to put it around them, and help them get there. We can do some great things here. So yeah, the school is fantastic. We have 4 schools that we actually bring kids in, and we have, 60 or 70 schools that we send counselors into the public schools to work with them. I mean, we'd love to be able to have all kids, but from a financial point of view, schools don't necessarily want to send kids away because that's their money, right? They don't want to send a public school kid unless they can't handle them. But a lot of them need it. A lot of them need that extra effort, extra time. And what we would love to do, what we're looking to do, we put together a virtual program where we're beginning to touch school districts and even outside of the country, where there's such a desire and such a need because nobody knows what to do.
Oh my gosh, I
You
love that so much.
And we're dealing with a school district in Australia for the same reason. And so we're experimenting with different ideas. We have the training and we have the therapy. How can we reach more people? I mean, there's so many people in areas that don't have the benefits of the city or the suburbs, that don't have that structure, don't have the therapist, don't have anybody, and they're stuck. What do you do? How do they get to heal? Our goal is to reach them and to connect with them, let them know that there is a way forward.
Very cool. So, Scotty, if people would like to get in touch with you, obviously you have the book, and I'm going to link that in
Sure.
the show notes.
That's great.
But if they're interested in maybe learning more about this program that you've got going on, how should they contact you?
So we have a website called childtraumasherpa.com or ctsherpa.com, and same name on Facebook and Instagram. And we have a bunch of community being built. The website has lots of blogs on it with lots of information and studies for anybody who wants to get a deeper dive in some of the science around trauma. We even have a counselor that's available if you want to just get a conversation started, completely free. We don't charge anything. Even the book we do at cost to us, because we just want to get it out as much as possible. I'm not an author. I just put it out and on Amazon, and it ended up being #1 in 8 different categories. That's how I know this is an important topic.
Yeah,
Because
there's definitely a
it wasn't
thirst
me.
for that
It
kind
was
of knowledge.
yes, because when people are hurting, they're willing to listen to anybody, and this is the right way of moving forward. It's all relationship based, and it works. So, thank you.
Scotty, is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't covered today?
The only other thing I would like to share is that schools like Lakeside, they can help kids of all areas. It's not just, when we talk about trauma, we think about behavior, but some of these kids have homicidal and suicidal ideations. Well, how do you deal with them? It's through counseling, it's through caring, it's through talking with them over time, and they can heal from that as well. So I want parents to know that this is a wide-ranging area. Trauma can affect them kids in many different ways, and that all these kids can heal if we give them the right environment, the right caring.
Scotty,
Thank
thank you
you.
for doing some beautiful work. It's appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.